push us along. Welcome everyone to our special council meeting for September 8th, 2020. And with that, we'll get going on our first meeting in person since anyone got the actual date, March something, obviously. But
17th.
so that would have been the week before that, I guess. So this is interesting. Good to see everybody back in the room and everyone obviously will hopefully too. No coughing, so everybody's feeling great. We'll get back. We do have quite a bit on the agenda tonight, so we'll get rolling right away. So move right on to item 2, approval of the agenda. And that recommendation reads that the agenda for the special council meeting of September 8, 2020 be approved as presented. I have that moved by Councilor Young, seconded by Councilor Shankar. Any discussion on the agenda this evening? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Item 3, declarations of interest. Any member of council on a declaration tonight? Seeing no. 4, delegations. So that takes us right into our video delegations tonight under 4.1. We'll start off with Rob Smith, who wants to speak to us and has provided some really good information on a proposal and some suggestions on trees and streetscaping down on Main Street. So I'll turn it over to Rob now, and Mr. Smith, if you're right at the end of the table, I guess you can see us a little bit, but we'll just have to, we're going to go by voice here mostly, I think, but if you want to take it away and lead us through your presentation, please. We have your information that was presented. It's up on the screen here in council chambers.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was having a problem unmuting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. My delegation, as Mr. Mayor mentioned, is about more trees on King Street. I forwarded to the town office today some suggested locations for trees along King Street, photographs of them. Of those, it would seem to me that one of the more beneficial sites would be as you're coming into town on Highway 2 from the east on the southeast corner of Edward and King. That would seem to be a particular good location to welcome people to Prescott with an attractive environment with the trees. My main function behind going with the trees actually though is because I've learned in the past in other places I've lived, they really help small towns attract business, people coming to live here and what have you. An attractive main street, in our question King Street, and I know, Mr. Mayor, I've touched with you before on this and you've agreed with this, is a big plus for a town such as Prescott. So we can build our business, attract people, and basically be a desirable place to live for everybody. I was suggesting maybe the other locations, you can see from the photographs, there are several there, but it goes all the way through town along King Street, from the place where I mentioned, down to actually near where I live, near Sapphire and King. And many of those places look to me to be ideal. I've been involved in tree planting before in towns I've lived in. And so I kind of did a bit of a survey and said, okay, you know, what would be good places here? And you notice mainly those photographs are of the north side of the street, meaning that the trees would get more light, obviously, because you know, from the sun coming down to them from the south. And personally, I think it would be very attractive and add a lot to our town. Types of trees, I'd suggest, done some research on this, would be sycamore or sugar maples. It's a good Canadian tree there. But there is a species of sycamore that is very, very suited to an urban environment. I also understand that although the Millions of Trees program, whatever it was called, from the provincial government was suspended, there are opportunities from the federal government to train trees under one of the programs they're running. And I wanted to run this by the council before I got in touch or with anybody, particularly say with Michael Barrett, to sort of see, you know, if that would apply to us here in Prescott. So I guess that's the end of my delegation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Certainly short and sweet. We always appreciate that. Busy agenda evening. And Mr. Smith, yeah, thanks so much for this. And we had a good chat on this a little earlier this year, I think it was. And, some interesting ideas, and it is something. Just before I open up for council, I'll note that I think it was our last BIA meeting. We have been talking about some streetscaping initiatives in conjunction with the BIA. We've purchased new waste baskets, new benches, and trees were on the agenda for discussion the last time. Because we have, if you notice, it's not just adding trees, some of the existing ones are in kind of rough shape as well. And I know our Public Works Operations Department, I've noted a few that are suffering a little bit. And I think it's a good time to actually revisit this whole topic for the downtown. Matthew, you did mention one potential option I think you were looking at. Phil, would you want to note that tonight, a larger potted tree kind of concept?
So one thing that we found is a lot of times when we put trees in concrete, they're going to heave the sidewalks, they're going to suffer from being in that concrete. And so what we started taking a look at is the very large planters, and you can even go a size up. What you're seeing on the back end of the tower parking lot, the clock tower parking lot, and what you're seeing on Water Street. So we could plant trees in those types of pots. It keeps them to a certain size so that they're not growing up and interfering with the buildings, but at the same time allowing us to stabilize the sidewalks, not cause further damage to them, and have some ability to move them from time to time if we see fit. So that is an option that's out there that we could certainly explore, and certainly there's a subtle benefits to it by doing it that way.
If I could just add in there, Mr. Armstrong, I guess a lot of that depends on the size of the pots. Thinking of in Montreal, when I lived there, they tried trees in fairly large pots, and of course these pots had to be put in and out every spring and fall, mainly because of the harsh winters for the trees, and they wouldn't survive. When we're talking about pots, are they kind of planters, or are they literally pots, if you get what I'm saying here?
They're very large planters, so they would be in excess of 100 liters.
Okay, so there will be enough for the trees to kind of grow there. And I think that's one of the reasons why sycamore is particularly recommended, because it does do less damage to concrete sidewalks in terms of how the root system works, because it tends to go down rather than out, which can cause great problems. I appreciate that, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need a plan for that, whether we plant or pot, because we obviously got some trees downtown that aren't doing well buried in the concrete. So open it up for comments, questions. I think Councilor Young had that.
Thank you. The majority of those trees downtown were planted in the late 70s, early 80s, so they're 40 years old. And perhaps the mistake that we made back then was choosing the trees whose root systems were not appropriate. Are the ones that you're suggesting a more appropriate route that will not raise the cement sidewalks or the paving stones around them?
Exactly, Councillor. Yes, exactly.
Good. Good. I think that would be a big improvement.
Councilor Denver. Councilor
Mr. Smith, could you tell that at the BIA meeting, we were discussing it a little bit, we wondered if some of the damage is coming from for 12 months of the year, they do have lights on them, but they're not wrapped around the trunk or anything, they're just hanging. Would that cause any damage to trees over the course of many years?
I'm sorry, Councillor, you were breaking up on me there. Could you just speak a little bit more loudly, if you wouldn't mind, please?
I can speak
So I can hear you down here from King Street.
We wondered if over a prolonged period of time, if lights hanging from trees would cause any damage to the trees that we now currently have downtown.
Okay, I think one of the big issues, to be quite blunt with you, is the existing trees that were put in there, apart from maybe not having appropriate root systems, is that trees, very obviously need light, and they need a lot of light if they're going to take in an urban environment, and they also need water. That's one of the big things about trees being planted in ground as opposed to in planters, in so much as that they can get a lot more water into their roots as the roots go straight down. I hope I'm answering your question there, Councillor. I was kind of half hearing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do like the idea of the potted trees. We could almost do like start out with the younger trees and then, when those trees are mature, then we could move them to an appropriate spot. So we could, start them downtown and move them to a park nearby when they're mature enough. I
As
mean,
if they got to be too big, you mean, in terms of creating problems?
absolutely, yes, absolutely. I do like that idea, and then we're helping the environment both ways.
Yeah, I think it does depend on the size of the pots a lot, which is why I asked Mr. Armstrong about that. If you look on in Toronto on University Avenue, they put trees in planters there, and they became too big and they kind of burst the planters. So I think it's a good idea to keep an eye on them. Yes, Councillor. And then to your point, they could maybe even be moved to some spots even on King Street, but where there is grass, not near sidewalks. One of my photographs there's a Bell Canada phone booth. I don't know if I assume that land belongs to Bell Canada, but that would be, an idea that a larger tree could be moved there after it grew out of its pot, maybe.
Councilor McConnell and then Councilor Shanker.
Thank you for your submission, Mr. Smith. I actually talked to Mr. Smith on the street last spring and suggested that he do a presentation to council when we get back. So I'm glad to see that he followed through on it. I'm not a big fan of trees and pots, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think Ray kind of hit the nail on the head there. The trees that are in there are pushing 40 years old. And honestly, I think for 40-year-old trees, they've done pretty well. Part of the reason, I guess, that I would say that maybe some of them haven't done so well is the area that's exposed around them. Granted, on a sidewalk, you only have so much space from the tree to the building, but you do have some space lengthwise. Perhaps if larger spaces were opened up, if the sidewalk around the trees, rather than being concrete, was interlocked, so you would have water going down through the interlock to help water the trees. I think all those things are relevant. Some of these spots that he showed for a possible selection of the tree are a good idea. That one's a good idea. The one in front of the Bell office is a good idea because it doesn't conflict with anything. But he also showed one, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was right beside, there we go, right beside a street lamp. There's absolutely
Yeah, probably wouldn't be ideal, I guess. Yeah.
Now, there's no use putting a tree beside a street lamp. The idea with a street lamp is you are going to light the street. If you plant a tree beside it, you basically just eliminate the light from the street lamp because it doesn't project anywhere. So you have to be careful with that. And having been a businessman on Main Street of Prescott and Brockville, and both Councillor Shankar and Councillor Young would be aware of this, if you have a tree that blocks your sign, it's not doing you much good as a businessman. It takes away from your ability to make money. You have to be careful where you plant trees. There are certainly spots like in front of the Bell Telephone office, or in front of that area on the east end, or in front of Al Wood's garage, where it's not going to conflict with any business purposes. So I think there is lots of room for more trees in the Main Street. And I would be in favor of putting them in the ground rather than pots. And on a related issue, I was talking to Matthew last week, and it was in regards to the trees between on Edward Street between King and Water on the east side of that block. There's either 3 or 4 trees there, I forget which. As a matter of fact, some of them are shown in the one picture. The staff plan is to remove those trees completely, which I don't agree with. That sidewalk is very narrow. It's not used much. I go up and down there all the time. It's the west sidewalk that's used. rather than taking those trees out, I would just eliminate that as a sidewalk entirely, remove some more bricks from around them to allow the trees to have more water, put some kind of a decorative barrier at the top and the bottom of the block. So you preserve the trees and you just eliminate it as a sidewalk. I think that's a much better solution than removing those trees.
A little later in the agenda, but I wonder if there's an accessibility issue, because the other side of the street is narrow.
It's, they're both the same.
Are they? I always assume that it's, anyways, we can get to that when we've got it later, but, no, good point.
Okay. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Preserve the trees that we have and, plant some more. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for bringing it forward to us.
Councilor Shanker.
Hey, thanks, Rob, for bringing this to us. How many trees were you thinking? And how mature would the trees be? Like, I'm a little worried about putting seed nuts, you know? like-
Yeah, exactly, exactly, Councillor. I was actually thinking, I mean, all of those sites weren't meant to be, you know, they were suggested sites, you know, and I appreciate the idea that they, you know, the tree canopy, as it were, can get in the way of business signs and so on. But I was thinking probably about a dozen trees in total, and maybe in, say, 3-4 meters high, something like that, you know. So they are trees as opposed to shrubs, if you know what I mean, or saplings rather, I guess would be the word. And it's probably a good idea on King Street at least to put some those metal barriers around them. You know, I forget what like the tree guards, you know, particularly when they're freshly planted, to protect them just from, you know, when the snow's being cleared and things like that, and other things that can go on. So, you know, so I guess about a dozen trees, Councillor Shanker, and as I said, about, you know, 2-3 meters high, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Ostrander.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you to Mr. Smith for presenting this great idea. I think with a proper assessment, we could probably have a combination of potted trees plus planted ones. There's various areas in town that look a little barren, as we can see from our pictures here. So I think it's a real good idea that we have a good look at these and just see what is best suited where. And I'm sure a plan can be devised to get that going. And, again, thank you for bringing it up. It's nice to see an interested citizen on the same wavelength as us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your time.
Thank you. I think with that, we got everybody's had a bit of a say here, so good discussion, and I think it will come back to us. Matt, I'm not sure what meeting we're bringing it, next meeting or first one in October, we'll bring that motion from the BIA back to us, so we will be looking at the option of a streetscaping plan down there, includes trees, and as always, Matt's been on this with Phil, our resident horticulturalist on staff. So I think we're gonna get some good recommendations out of this. The one thing I just say from my own point of view on there, I like symmetry, especially with the downtowns, so there's some sort of organized plan, and we haven't had that downtown, even when we put the new street lights in, it was kind of a hodgepodge where we were trying to reuse the existing bases, that didn't exactly work out, we added lamp posts, and it's the same thing with the trees, so some sort of symmetry down there, I think we could provide a really nice welcoming, bringing people in on Highway 2, with the added trees, the pots, and so forth. So I think, Mr. Smith, thanks again for bringing this forward. It's great to have your input on this, and anything else comes up, please email it into staff for distribution to council, so we can get the benefit of your experience here and opinions as well. And we should have something coming back in the next few weeks, and hopefully with council approval, we'll move on a plan for down there that will involve trees and just essentially streetscaping and making the downtown more, a little greener and a little more attractive for visitors. So thanks again, Mr. Smith, and
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll be in touch in the not too distant future regarding trees downtown and other improvements down there. So thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 4.2, we have George Tierney wants to speak to us about the Upper Canada Folk Fest, which will be happening at the amphitheater, the Kinsman Amphitheater downtown at the start of October. George, you want to take it away?
Guys, thanks for having me. Don't know how deep into the background you want me to go. Has everyone seen the press release now and had a chance to look at it or have a sense of what we're presenting, or you want me to go right from square one?
I think we're pretty good, just whatever your comfort level is, George, just to get everybody up to speed. This is going out online as well, there will be people that will watch the meeting, so you might want to just kind of give it a bit of a overview first.
Sure. Good. Okay. So what we've put together is a folk festival. It was sort of born last year. We started working on it January, February, and of course everything came to a grinding halt. There's a group of us that are very involved in folk music across Canada. Two of us are currently, myself and Graham Lindsay, are on the board of the Canadian Folk Music Awards. Another one of our members is a founding member of the CFMAs. Mary Moore, local from Spencerville, is very involved in the music community. And Herb Kluche out of Kempville is a promoter and a musician in the area as well. So all of us are very, very well versed in putting together music events, large festivals, that type of thing. So the organization side of it is sort of the easiest part for us. It's really a no-brainer to pull it together. The whole reason for doing it is we looked at what was available for folk music, for music festivals in the area, and there's room for another. The only real festivals in Eastern Ontario, in closer to the St. Lawrence Valley, that are continuously successful is bluegrass music. They've got a great following, so we know there's an appetite for it. In putting it together, our tagline really everything that we do. There's a list of strict regulations that we've put in place. It's on the website. Anybody that purchases tickets to the event has had to click a button that obviously says, I have read and agreed to the COVID safety rules that we're putting in place. In short, those rules are that all the organizers will continuously wear masks. The musicians will wear a mask until the moment they're on stage singing. The musicians are all bringing their own microphones to use, so no one has any concerns about transfer in that regard. For the lineup, obviously, we've got a huge number of volunteers, going to keep people 6 feet apart. Most importantly, seating, and why the amphitheater rose from maybe 1 or 2 spots we could have done this to it being really the only place it can work is with the limitation to 100 attendees. We can very easily space the chairs out in pairs throughout the amphitheater. Loosely speaking, the measurement is in a row across one level. The pairs of chairs will be 13 feet apart. You stagger them like checker blocks up the amphitheater, and that puts the heads of the people from the row back to the row forward at just over 7 feet apart. So we're beyond the 6 foot range. And guests will be fully expected to be masked until they're seated to enjoy the show. And we're going to be vigilant if people pick up their chairs and move into a group of 4. We'll have our protocols in place about asking them once or twice politely to not do that. And third try is going to be, sorry, thank you. You agreed to our terms and conditions of a safe environment, and you're putting others out of comfort and at risk. And that really is the big part of it for me. Is we all know we're all at different levels of comfort for public events, and we want the most anxious person to come out and feel safe. So that's that side of it. In terms of the event itself, it runs on October 3rd. It goes from 1 until 6. We picked that time frame very specifically so that people coming to Prescott, because a good number of the tickets are going to come from out of town, most definitely with the talent that we've booked. We want people to be able to come to town and have lunch before they go to the show or hang around for dinner afterwards, which is why we quite specifically didn't add 2 more acts, and we're not running from noon until 7, because then we're not supporting the town as much. People would really come to town, see the show, and leave again. So we want to create that opportunity for the restaurants to get involved. We will be approaching the local restaurants to see if they want to participate in terms of sponsorship, in terms of couponing, hey, each restaurant, would you like to, for the value of a free meal, and this is done at other festivals, is, one of our acts might get a coupon for a dinner for free at O'Heafey's, and then O'Heafey's is on board as a in-kind sponsor. So we're reaching out to those groups this week to accomplish that. In terms of the talent that we had, if you've seen the list, we've got James Keelahan, who is a Juno and CFMA recipient. Jim Bryson, Jim Bryson has been on, I've heard him on CBC 3 times in this past week already. Lynn Hansen is from Ottawa. She's part of the Lins, which is another CFMA award-winning group. She's coming solo to us. And Tripod, who is Terry Tufts, a Eastern Ontario local. To me, he's just a folk music legend. He's been around forever. And he and his wife and his daughter are performing as their group, as opposed to him performing on their own. So the purpose of me being here today, so that's the outline for our event and what we're doing and how we're doing it and who we are. The purpose for being here today is to ask the town for support. And what I'd like to ask for is a bunch of money. So I would owe to you what we are going to do with that money. And the 2 amounts I'd like to request is $500 or $1,000. Clearly we'd like the 1,000, but don't know how deep your pockets are at this point in the year. But with the $500, if you supported us to the tune of $500, that money is going to go directly to support and enhance this event. The musicians are making tremendous sacrifices. They're playing at, a quarter or less of their traditional rate for this type of gig, but they're all eager to play. They're all eager to support us and get this off the ground. If you were able to support us, so that money would be going, we're okay with budget, we're okay with ticket sales. Any support that we can pull in at this point is going to first and foremost top up the performers. In our contractual agreement with them, we're basically going to share where we land financially and say, guys, look, we did this well, therefore we can give each of you this little bit more compensation for the event. Any money we can get beyond that is going to go to do 2 things. First, it's going to we're going to enhance the experience of the event. We're going to add a couple of banners. We'll get masks with the logo on it for the volunteers and our board, and just start enhancing the presentation overall. Then more importantly, as soon as we're done this, at this point, we don't have NPO status. We didn't have time and energy to get this off the ground so quickly and get NPO status. That's going to cost us some money to get through that process. So any monies that we have that, call it quote unquote a profit, are going right back into building the event for next year. For next year, we certainly intend to stay in Prescott if you'll have us and if there's space available. The amphitheater, as we know, can hold 300, 400, 500 people. When I've played there with my band, we've seen 350 people and there's still space. So we know that we can get a good enough number there. This is not a one and done event. The group we've pulled together, once we get our NPO status, we will act as a board, we will grow it. And sort of my hope and dream is that the area south of the fort, that Prescott will see fit to keep that cut if it needs to be. But that is a natural amphitheater with putting the stage perhaps down at the water. So you've got the St. Lawrence as a backdrop. And could we bring thousands of people to Prescott? I honestly believe that we can. And just the fact that you look at the caliber of performers we've brought in our first year, we know we can grow from there. So that's, like I say, who we are, what we're doing, and our request for support. So are there any questions?
Thanks very much, George. I'll open it up to council now, but I just want to thank you for thinking of us and coming forward earlier, I think last month, with the idea. You came forward, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And we definitely can always do more with music here in town. I love the fact you did mention to me that natural amphitheater, because we took advantage of that for Royal Estates years ago. We brought that back, and we did Royal Estates and had the battles down there. You really see, once you're staging anything down there, how perfect that is, either looking north or south, actually, for that natural amphitheater. You need to do something around there. It would be, like, the possibilities there are incredible. But with that, I'll just open it up for comments, questions from the council. Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, George. I know that you're very passionate when it comes to the music side of things. I've been involved in sitting at the Windmill Brewery and listening to the different bands that you brought in. I think this is a fabulous idea, and definitely would like to support you, and looking forward to attending as well. So if you need some support personally, I will definitely help you out in any way I can.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Other comments, questions from George? Councilor Strang.
Nice to hear your plans, George, for some music in our town. I don't think we've heard any all summer, and I think we're a little deprived of entertainment, and this is really stirred up some excitement, I know, among people who are aware of it, and I think everybody's trying to spread the word about it, and particularly with our amphitheater, because it's the hub of our entertainment in town, and we're really looking forward to it. I recognize some of your names on your program there, and this is going to be a big plus for us to get back in the entertainment business here in town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Strang. Councilor Schenker.
Hey, George, great idea. Is this something that you think will expand in the future to like a Folk Fest weekend or a Folk Fest week? And you mentioned bringing thousands of people to Preston. Is that your ambition or your goal going forward?
Yeah, that's 100% the goal. It's going to be, the growth is going to be entirely dependent on funding and what we're going to be allowed to do, because I think we're all starting to think there's going to be COVID rules in place even next summer. So it will really be based on that. I would like to see it stay in Prescott for at least a few years, without at any point saying, you know, gee whiz, we should have called it the Prescott Folk Fest. It really is Upper Canada, because we wanted to support Eastern Ontario musicians. That, you know, at the outset, let's say for a few years, you know, we'll try and say, yes, you have to have an Eastern Ontario address for it to work. If it stays in Prescott forever, I'd be thrilled. And that can strengthen a festival. You think about Mariposa, right? It goes for 3 or 4 days. You know, Almont Kilt Fest is the closest comparable in my mind. And they've got locals on Friday night, and we were supposed to have played there this year, and it runs Saturday and Sunday, and they get very big names into that as well. So that would be my goal, is to grow it as close to home as possible. The other side of it is we simply couldn't logistically fit it in this year, but we want to have local musicians and up and coming youth musicians. But with the restrictions and the number of people coming and going, we just felt it was important that we're just going to stick to our 5 names, work hard, make that show a success, and then going forward. I would have loved to added a few more local names to the show, but it was just jamming them in is too many people in too tight a space. What we are going to do is there's a 15-minute turnover between musicians. So 5 performances, each 45 minutes with a 15-minute turnover. In those 15-minute turnovers, we will be playing local musicians' music. So of course, Happy Crap music is going to be played. Pat Johnson's going to be played. So the gang between Morrisburg, Kentville, and Brockville. So anytime there's not a performer on the stage, we are going to be playing their albums. And then the real extension from there is through the year, not next year, but following year, we're going to want to have smaller events throughout the year, just because we can, what we love doing.
Right?
Since the event is less than a month away, would you entertain a motion tonight?
Yeah, as I was gonna get to that after we got around the table. Anyone else have anything else to say that's not fundraising or funding related right now? 'Cause we can go. Okay, because we can go right, yeah, we can go right to that. I was gonna say it's not usually what we do, but because we're in a bit of a time crunch, Councilor.
Mr. Armstrong, I believe we have some money left in our grant fund.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to make a motion that we donate $1,000 to this project in hopes that it will continue for many years to come.
Do I have a seconder? I think Mike just be showing that, and that's great, all support all around. So motions on the table, it's been seconded. Any further discussion? I'll call the vote then, all in favor? Excellent. So that was easy, George, and you mentioned 500, I was gonna say, you mentioned 500, and you mentioned 1,000, you're almost certainly gonna get 500, boy. Ray must have hit his head on the way in here tonight, but no, that's really, really good. Thanks again for putting this on. I know I'll be buying tickets as well, so please, probably save a few for a bunch of us around the table here. So wish you all the best for this, and anything we can do as a partnership moving forward as well, because we'd love to be able to turn this into a strong yearly event.
Perfect. That's fabulous. I can't thank you enough for the support.
Thank you so much, and I guess we'll see you in October. Anything else comes up between now and then, let us know.
You'll hear from me.
Thanks a lot, George. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
I guess in that light, we will have to make sure that the marina is still functioning at that time.
There's one thing I was going to ask Matthew, just in terms of staffing, we're not looking at anything extreme for this. I mean, they'll be doing a lot of the setup and tear down themselves, obviously, and we just have to make sure that the building's open. There's an attendant on the.
Okay, so that, we just see that, we make sure that we have the attendant there, but no major cost.
Councilor Paul?
Are we still limited to 50 inside, or are we up to 100 now because we're limited to 50 to rink doesn't work?
What for?
In the event of rain.
Oh, yeah, that's that's something I hadn't even looked at. Is he looking at a rain venue? I didn't think that he was.
No, it's not
Okay, I thought I missed something. So I think we're.
Maybe I'm sorry. Did you not ask? Did I miss here? I thought you asked about the rink in the event of rain.
No, the marina, because they want to use.
Oh,
washrooms.
Marina washrooms.
I heard the rink. I don't know.
So, yeah, so we should be pretty good on that for staffing arrangements and everything, so sounds fantastic. So thanks again to George and his team for putting this together for us. It's gonna be a big hit. So moving on to 5 minutes of our previous council meeting, 5.1 minutes of our special council meeting on August 10th. The recommendation of special council minutes dated August 10th, 2010 be accepted as presented. I have that moved by Councilor McConnell, seconded by Councilor Jansen. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion carried. Item 6, communications and petitions. 6.1, action items, nothing under the action items this evening. 6.2, we do have the usual package of information items. The recommendation moved by Councilor Shankar, seconded by Councilor Ostrander, the information items under separate cover be received and filed. So before we vote on that, as always, I open it up for comments, questions on the info pack, which is, as always, a pretty thick information package. Anyone want to speak to any items on that tonight or refer anything to a future meeting? Councilor McConnell.
I just wanted to thank the Township of Augusta. I mean, we have been used to sometimes over our past years of finally reading in the paper that our neighbors are doing something. And in regards to this complete application that they have here for the water park to the west of us, I don't know if you read through it or not, but it's pretty intense. And we actually have advanced notice, and here it is in all its complexity. So I just like to say thank you to Augusta Township for being great neighbors. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, the partnership's been fantastic. It's nice to see it rolling out in all areas. Anything else anyone would like to speak to in the info pack tonight? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that motion then, all in favor? Motion's carried. So on to item 7, staff have a number of reports there tonight, and 7.1, actually, we start off the presentation on Prescott Edwardsburg Cardinal Fire Services Agreement. I think we're close to the finish line on that, and welcome Chief Morehouse is here as well this evening, so Barry, you can finally come in.
Thank you.
So I'll turn it over to CAO and Fire Chief, whoever's doing the presentation. Barry, you do it?
Yep. Make sure I can see it. So yeah, thank you for the time. This is just we've been talking about this for many, many years. Many different CAOs, different leadership. So we just want to come to a conclusion. Myself, along with CAO Armstrong, CAO Dave Grant, and Chief Moore from Edwardsburg Cardinal, we've met several times to go through and come up with this plan. So I just wanted to present this first on behalf of the fire department and Mr. Armstrong to council. So a bit of a history on this. The original agreements that we had with both Edwardsburg Cardinal and Augusta were established by, one was the insurance industry, by the municipality and the township. We were dispatched, there was structure in the plans that were put in place. Again, we were responding to any fire calls, any motor vehicle accidents, alarms, and medical assists within each one of the townships that neighbor our municipality. The last recorded update to the agreements were back in 1992, which is a few years ago in most of our books. So benefits of this, there was insurance rate reductions. I know today, if you're within 5 kilometers of certain fire halls, shallow conditions, fire hydrants, there are reduced rates, so there's that to the homeowners. There is improved, obviously, response and optimization of the equipment and manpower that we have available, both in the town and into the townships. And again, the whole ultimate reason we do this is just the reduced risk of life and property. So one of the things that I always remember is that my primary responsibility, along with CAO Armstrong, is the responsibility of our municipality and residents here. So you'll hear me say this many times, anything that we have within our municipality is for the utilization of emergencies within the town of Prescott. So any agreements, any mutual aid programs, anything that is secondary is secondary. My primary responsibility is to the town of Prescott, and the equipment that is in here in the town of Prescott serves the needs primarily, first of all, to the residents of Prescott. Okay. Second slide. So as far as the agreement, map's a little bit hard to see, but I do have it outlined. So the original plan for us was at Edwardsburg Township, we covered down to the North Channel Road. And again, it was all just south of the 401. There was nothing on the north side, it was just strictly on the south side, all the way down to North Channel Road. But this has changed with current agreements. We only go down to Granville Park. One of the things we did was just do some timing studies, response times, took a look at the residential properties were in there, how quickly can we respond, and is there a true benefit for the town of Prescott or our equipment to travel any further down the east end to the North Channel, and there wasn't. So we made some adjustments. So you'll see here the agreements go down County Road 2 from Prescott to Granville Park. So that blue number is the very last location. We do cover the east end of Cedar Grove Road. We've always covered Augusta, but we never covered the Cedar Grove portion of Edwardsburg Cardinal, so that's included in there. And then also some of the Fraser Road, again, timing studies, taking a look at the number of calls that we received, extended that. Highway 16 from County Road 2 north to the 401, and then Highway 401 from exit 716 east to exit 721B, which is the new 416 northbound from exit 721B, the first turnaround. So again, it covers a little bit of those areas. That's more an agreement. It's not Edwardsburg Township, it's Centio, right? It's provincial highways that we're covering just from a service perspective. So in total, we service a good 503 residencies within that area, response zone that you see here. And then obviously everybody is very familiar with commercial buildings that are in the area. the ethanol plant, the Port of Johnstown, which is busier, Prisian, the Giant Tiger warehouse, and now the Johnstown rail yard, which is continuing to expand. We just recently did a tour up there, and it is a busy site with a lot more spurs going in, a lot more activity, so a lot of infrastructure in there. And again, the other thing that I'll note on this was a change in the response method was Chief Moore mentioned that, as part of the provincial downloading is optimization. How do we not, when there's I always say that a 9-volt battery and a CO2 detector that goes off, we pay 75 volunteers between Prescott and Edwardsburg Cardinal. We could send at times, not knowing enough detail, we could send $2 to $3 to $4 million worth of equipment to a 9-volt battery. So one of the things that we talked about is in this response zone that we've got within Edwardsburg Cardinal is just its optimization. So if there's just an alarm call, just Prescott is going. We still have like a tiered response. If I need to escalate it through the organization, you can obviously call them. I know Chief Moore is monitoring the calls that are within his township. Activated alarms, low end, I should say low end, that's not a proper term. Not a significant medical assist calls, we'll look at that as well. And again, just Prescott's responding. If there's any fire calls or potential of smoke, then obviously all 3 stations are paged out. Again, that's just optimization from an overall perspective. And again, to me, kind of needs some of the provincial optimization that we're working with Augusta in the fire review that's going on. So that is some of the new agreements, some of the new protocols that we've been taking place over the last several months. Okay. So just a quick summary. One of the things that we looked at during this review was five-year chunks. I think from a service agreement perspective, if you look at the 5-year chunks and the 5 years, update the agreements based on the data that's there, it's always changing. Infrastructure changes, the type of construction changes, the fire codes are changing on a regular basis, so you'll always see again, constant change. Or bylaw services, how vigorous we are at that activity. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, calls Edwardsburg Cardinal. In total, it just shows, per year. And again, you've always seen that roughly about 30 on average. That includes any highway calls that are within the township themselves. So just a note on that while I talk a little bit further. On the right-hand side, again, it's just the type of commercial building, whether it's residential or highway. We broke that out as well. In the future, we talked about the highway calls, we're going to take them out. So when you see the 41 calls, you've got to remove that from the total of the 156 that responded in the township for. We bill separately, so we did not include that in the overall review of Edwardsburg Cardinal because we charge the MTO, which in turn charges the insurance company. So that would be exempt in any of the calls or time that we're putting in between the 2 townships.
Just back that, you got residential twice there on the type. What's the difference?
I'm not sure actually. I'll take a look at that. I'll take a look at that for some reason. Good question. I'll look. Could be a mutual aid aspect too. I know I put some mutual aids in there that were outside of the normal agreements. I mean, that's the difference. So base payment. So one of the things we're looking at is saying, how do we cover the costs around utilization of our vehicles and some of the training and aspects like that. So what the 4 of us looked at is our amortization. So some of the trucks, our training and specialty resource costs. So that would include our ice water rescue that we charge in a different way. We took a look at that and summarized it from a yearly perspective. And again, I focused on utilizing the last 5 years of 911 calls to the township, which overall represents roughly about 12% of the total number of calls that the Prescott Fire Department responds to. That includes the Augusta calls as well. So in that 12%, we took the ratio of the amortization, training, and specialties, and basically come up with a base payment of roughly around $14,000 to $16,000 based on, again, payments that we have on our trucks, training costs, and our specialty resource costs, which is our emergency water rescue. Each 911 call, so that would be our base payment between $14,000 and $16,000. That would be, I'll say, guaranteed every year. On top of that, we took a look, every fire call that we respond to is logged through dispatch, and I pull that data. So what I looked at roughly was saying right now the MTO rates are $435 an hour per truck. So if we use that base, which always is up to date, that's what we charge for highway calls. If we took that and utilized that rate on all of the time that we spent in the township, that would give us the additional costs and coverage on top of the $14,000 to $16,000 base that we utilize every single year. Does that make sense? I'll show you the next chart is just a breakdown. So again, taking a look at the last 5 years, MTO rates typically, and again, I just did a simple base. I said we always respond with our rescue and our pumper truck in normality to any call. If it's a medical assist, for example, we only send a utility truck, so that base would be $435 instead of the $970. But to keep it simple, this would be our base payment that I talked about roughly with calculations that we had, and then this would be the yearly payments over the last 5 years that we would receive from the township based on the duration of time that we spent at each one of the calls. So in summary, reminder, they pay us right now $14,000 and Augusta pays us $15,000, but the sums would be what you see across there per year. Now on the opposite, you see here in 2019, we spent very little time in Edwardsburg Cardinal fire calls. We may have had 27 of them, but they were very low. We went down and basically turned back around. So the duration and the amount of time we spent down there was pretty minimal.
Would there be a base though on that, Barry, so when you called it, did the hour or?
Yeah, well, we could have that discussion. Typically with the MTO, it's the half. You go to the half hour, and that's what you mark yourself as. So it would be half of the $435 for half an hour minimum cost. Is typically what we do with the MTO.
Is that calls that you get stood down on when you're halfway there?
Could be, yeah. I took everything. Any calls that we were there that required us to take a roll call or was logged by dispatch. So those calculations on the yearly payments was the total amount of time. Again, it was just to give us some rough ideas from a cost perspective.
14,000 is basically a standby fee if we have no calls.
Exactly. That would be paid out at any point. And again, that's that coverage per year based on some of the costs.
So are you referring to the 14.3?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Not the current agreement payment of 14.1. You're talking about 14.3, right?
Bruce?
Will there be a natural build in increase yearly for cost of expenses?
So absolutely, we can do that. We have that in several other agreements, and so we can certainly build that in. However, when it comes to the MTO rates, we would suggest sticking with the MTO rate, so that anytime MTO changes, we would automatically change to that rate.
Great, thank you. And the 970, so before, you explained the 435?
Yeah.
So the 970 is not,
So that would be, sorry,
2 trucks.
that would be the 2 trucks responding. That's only 875. Where did we get that 970 from?
Tax.
But I think there was an administrator tax in there.
Maybe, yeah, because there's values that we look at from an MTO and that's what we charge or we get paid
so
back.
it's basically double of the.
Yeah,
Okay.
and again, I just try to use, I try to use, like I said, it depends on the call and the response that you have, right? Try to minimize, but at a minimum, our pumper and our rescue typically go to a majority of the call, just because of the equipment we have on it.
Barry, you finished the presentation now? Is this, or did you just go through that and then we'll get back to the
Yeah.
questions for everyone if you want?
Yeah, so just the last one.
So, you know,
I can do that. So the very last, like I said, between the 4 of us have met several times. We would like to make that effective January 1st. Again, that's our goal. We've been talking about this for many years, so put our hard sort of approach to it. Again, I emphasized at the very beginning, our equipment that we have within, whether we didn't respond in Edwardsburg Cardinal or Augusta, is the minimum requirements that we need, other than our, say, our utility trucks. that we require for fire suppression in the town of Prescott. And again, those outlines are not mine, but obviously they're outlined by the Underwriters Association, the province and the Ontario Fire Marshal. Like as far as any working relationships, I've always said we never had any concerns. I know there may be some of the political side of it, but we are a very strong working group. We have great relationships with our two townships, and that's always remained strong. And that's always my number one focus outside of the town of Prescott. A lot of this, I focused on the data. I looked at everything that we grabbed, whether it's kilometers or minutes or whatever else. That's how we try to come up with some sort of structure around this. And again, we want to take a lot of this time and money and resources that we utilize for this agreement, take it on to Augusta and have that discussion with them and just replicate the plan. So that's the overall package.
Thanks very much, Chief. Councilor McCollum.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. Barry, do you take training into account with this at all? Because I know the department familiarizes itself with the different buildings in town and out of town. So you're through all the factories and warehouses and stuff that we're covering down in the Johnstown area. Is any of that hour-wise accounted for here?
It is not in those type of calls. I'm always cautious because you also have the second avenue of mutual aid, whether we're called or not, we have agreements, it's more preparation for us. So I do not include that in the time, like the recent tour that we took through the rail yards.
Okay, thank you. What about, what about, do we have equipment that the township does not have? That they take advantage of, something people that don't have, do we have any neighbors out there?
I'd say both ways. One, right, we have our area, and our specialty service would be water rescue. We have technical rescue training for land-based water, so that costs us roughly about $3,000 a year to maintain equipment and utilize, maintain our technical training. So I've also included that in that calculation. In the reverse, I've always said, we rely on them. We do not have any protection on the north side of 401. So equally, we got to rely on them. I have what I consider sort of a gentleman's agreement that if we ever receive anything that has any flames visible or smoke, I've got 900 gallons on our respirator pumper. We need to utilize them immediately to start responding both from Augusta and from Edwardsburg Cardinal. And some of the calculations we also built them in to be fair on both sides, right?
They both have tanker trucks, which we do not.
Yes.
So these trucks will run back and forth.
So automatically for us in our agreements, again, Edwardsburg Cardinal and Augusta are automatically dispatched with tankers. And again, they're 2 to 2,500 gallon tankers, and then we'll escalate from there depending on the situation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Schenker.
Yeah, I have a few questions. So one, the 14,142, how long has that been in place?
That has been in place since, 92. It was, I know, Chief Lawrence and myself both over the years said, even just a 2% increase from 1992 to this point would have, definitely increased the value into $30,000, $40,000 over that duration potentially. But we haven't, so that's why, again, we talked about these agreements and updating them. Also saying from a liability perspective, that's why I put even the expectations from an operational perspective in place so that I have, whether it's a bylaw or an SOG, so that I cover both myself, Chief Moore and Chief Bowman, so that there's no liability concerns.
So the next question I have is, on your slide there, it said there's 503 residences that were?
Yeah.
Okay. And the last question I had, for 2020, there's only been one call?
That needs to be updated, but there has been. We have not, over the duration of, I think we've had maybe 3 calls now in total, but it's been very low because our overall call at this point volume is, I think, we're around 90 calls for the year, which is typically around 140 to 150 per Prescott.
And then only 1 or 3?
Yeah, there has not been many.
And there's normally about 30 or so.
On average, there's about 30 total townships.
Is that just because of the pandemic figure or?
First 2 months, we were only at 1 or 2 times. When things were quiet, they're still remaining quiet overall.
So that number, sorry, just to go back, I just want to make sure I heard this right. 14,142 has been priced and paying since 1992?
So there's been a small escalator during the last several years. But I believe it's in the neighborhood of 1 to 2%. But that really started in the latter part of 2010s.
Probably about 300 houses down there, maybe at that time. Certainly not industrial work.
No, I mean, we did, sort of, you know, and we did reach out, you know, Chief Moore sent out a note to the entire fire chiefs. Is there any models that we could utilize? It's not the residential portion, it's the risk assessments around the industrial properties that we have now. We're obviously high risk. We know that. For the most part, we know that the resources, I'll say, that we have here and you know, between us and Edgersburg, Carmel, based on the fuel loads that we know we have. So we're planning escalation process.
Sorry, Mary, we just had another comment.
A question, and I'm not sure you can answer this, if you can, perhaps Matthew can. If one of our firefighters, one of our firefighters gets hurt fighting a fire or doing anything else, fire related in a township, whose insurance covers them? Ours or the township?
I believe in this case, ours would, and we have very specific insurance related to the fire personnel that is separate from the overall town insurance.
UFIS, and it is specific because they're underneath the leadership of us. Whether they're responding inside or not, they're still directed by my supervisors and our staffs and our equipment.
In all honesty, I think that's something that needs to be looked at, because we have had one firefighter that I'm aware of severely hurt in the township a number of years ago, and it's affected the rest of his life. And if we are fighting a fire in the township, it's not in the town of Prescott, I think the township should be responsible insurance wise. I would love to see us look into that.
Further comments, questions for the chief tonight? Just my own, can we go back to the first slide that showed that the new base is, you're talking about a new base of 14 to 16? And that's actually where I get like, can someone show me the math on that? And what, because quite frankly, that just seems awfully low. Because I mean, that's the same number going back, what, 28 years? And we've added millions of dollars in equipment, building and so on. And, you know, this is a, you know, negotiation between friends and allies here. But at the same time, I think that number is awfully low in the base. So I don't know, Matthew, Chief Moore, somebody that can actually maybe enlighten us to that one, because that just seems spectacularly low.
So what we did is we took a look at what the cost of the equipment that is utilized in those calls, along with the training, the on-call, liability, the specialty resources that we have. Then took that total amount of costs, took the fact that 12% is the representative number, and that's how we came to that total. So it, and the amortization amounts of the equipment is over 20-year life. So it, even on $1 million piece of equipment, then when you amortize it down over 20 years and then multiply it by 12%, the numbers become very, very small in those cases. So that's really what we're talking about from that perspective. We're not talking about the buildings, because the building in and of itself is not what that service is for. So if Edwardsburg Carmel, and I have to make this point, is that this is a bilateral agreement. So if Edwardsburg Carmel or Augusta decide to build a new fire station, I wouldn't expect us to adorn the cost for that. So really what we focused on, and the other side of the equation is, what does this cost for a pumper, and then how does that affect the negative side of the equation?
You're just talking about a formula based on cost recovery, right?
That's correct.
Well, you're leaving out, we need to put money aside to replace these trucks and so on in the future, are we not? Should something be put in there as well to,
So that's how the amortization works, is basically you're paying for that piece of equipment, and then the next, each time you replace it, then the amortization, they're paying towards it over that time period.
I'd love to see the formula on that, Tony, not that I distrust you in any way, because I know you're very, very careful with the numbers, but this does seem, just seems very, very low. Councilor Young?
There are situations like this around the province where large municipalities look after their neighbors as well. A couple of those I remember were based on a house price, $25 per house sort of thing. And the advantage of that is when a new subdivision of 100 homes went in, well, your fee went up accordingly. So, did we do any of that?
I looked at that actually many years ago, because this is nothing to do with Matthew, but this is what my 10th reiteration of this rate and different. Baccalaureate asked me to do it many, many years ago. We had gone to the province, and there was a scenario around the Napanee area where, I think we were talking about some potential residential properties just to the west of us. And it roughly worked out to be, I think it was $23 or $25 per household from a residential perspective, right? And overall, we're roughly in that area with the amount of, residential properties. Again, I go back to like the biggest risk in the dollar value is around the industrial properties that we have to, service. So,
The biggest risk and the biggest danger to us. We're also protecting 800 jobs down there. There's an awful lot of jobs down there.
our difficulty always has been, and I could go and talk to the mayor about this or whatever, it's how do you, again, what's the calculations look like? This was the closest, again, trying to pull in. I mean, we could at the end of the day say it's X amount of dollars or $50,000. It's just how does it make sense when I stand here or, when we stand here and take it to the two neighboring townships as well. If there's different formulas or different looks at it, we can definitely share the calculations based on, our current training budget is X amount of dollars, it's roughly around $13,000. So again, we're going to be splitting some of that if we replicate this between Edward Cardinal and Augusta Township, so that would be, that's roughly about 25 to 30% of our budget covered in some of those areas when you start looking at it. So, but we can share some of the bases that we had in there.
Councilor Shaker?
Sorry, one last question. Have you've had discussions with Edward Cardinal, and are they comfortable with this formula?
As they're comfortable, yes, we've had several conversations with them, that's with the CAO and the chief. This has not been shared outside of our foursome. Just because, again, this is the best calculations. I mean, I use pretty specific values in there based on just throwing some values in and utilizing the 12%. So that I think overall we were comfortable from an overall calculation just based on the data that we have. Again, minutes, kilometers, whatever we have, without just having a gut check and a number thrown out there.
So my understanding is that this will be coming forward to Edwardsburg Cardinal Council Committee next week for their discussion.
So we're not expecting any action on this tonight?
We're kind of looking at next steps, getting feedback. I think something that I heard is wanting to see a little bit more in depth on the calculations. Certainly we'll do that. There's a couple of things that we need to clarify in terms of just some of the numbers. But, and then talking about liability and then showing kind of the in and the out for the service they provide as well. So.
Okay, anybody, any further feedback, comments tonight from the chief or from CAO?
No, I think what we tried to do with structuring this is come back to something that in 5 years from now, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That we can say, here's what we used last time, here's the numbers, this is how they come out. And then update the numbers, go from there. Then by using the MTO rates, we're focusing on something that's verifiable, changes as the province changes the rate, and then we can move forward again from there. So that was really what we were trying to structure out of this, and certainly including a base payment incremental from year to year makes sense, and we have a couple of examples of that we already have in agreements. And really what the two portions that we want to do is make sure that we're very clearly defining what the services are being provided to Prescott as well as Sudbury Cardinal. And then secondly, trying to develop a formula. And I think Chief Morehouse mentioned that they did canvass out across the province, and the response was significantly underwhelming in terms of the number of agreements that people have out there and are able to rely on. So that's really what we were trying to do, come back so that next time in 5 years we go to take a look at this, we can say, this is how we update it. There's not a discussion about the calculation, but more about the overall context.
And it's a difficult one too, because obviously you want to put a proper formula to it to assess value, so you're not picking the numbers out of thin air. But I mean, you're looking at an industrial area down there as well that is very valuable property. Also, there's some potential high risk down there as well to equipment and of course, life and limb. So there's just gotta be a way to factor all of that in. If we ever had an incident down there where say we lost a truck or something happened and we're receiving precisely, 20, 30,000 bucks a year for this, and we end up losing a truck, and then even worse, God forbid, someone gets seriously injured, like we make sure we can point on that as well, that, there's a real cost, a human cost to that, and there's a monetary cost. And if we were sitting back here and we were company X that was providing fire services for industrial areas, it sure wouldn't start at a value like this. And I'm not saying we should be looking at it that way, but at the end of the day, we've got to run the town like a business too, and we have to make sure that we're receiving fair value for our expenses and our equipment and our manpower and expertise and everything. So it's a tough one, and I don't mean to be critical of this tonight, because I'm not. I think we've come a good ways with this, and it's nice to see where we're at this point. But I just think for comfort level, just speaking for myself, I'd like to see a little more information on this and just kind of think about it a bit. And I kind of get that from, I don't see anybody jumping up and down about this here tonight, but I think it's just maybe another hurdle, another couple of steps we're going to have to go. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, just an add-on to what you said, and Dear Todd, you made a very good comment. What happens if we lose a truck at a chemical fire down in the industrial park? We pay for it. What happens if one of our people get hurt fighting a fire down there? We pay for it. In both of those cases, I don't think we should be paying for it. If we lose a truck helping our neighbor should pay for the truck. And if one of our people are hurt helping our neighbor, and likewise, if they're helping us with their pumper north of the 401 and they lose a truck, I think vice versa should apply. The odds of that happening and not in our favor are not very good, but are not very bad. But anyway, I think both of those things need to be factored into this thing, and I don't think they are.
We can take a look at our mutual aid agreements, right? This is nothing new. There's these type of service agreements, there's automatic agreements, there's also our mutual aid agreement, which, isn't covered in all of this, that we cover the entire county of Leeds and Grenville with the resources that we have in the town of Prescott and vice versa. It's mutual benefit, but we can ask, between our VFIS, but also ask our county coordinator and our fire marshal advisor just on those protocols and see if there's anything in place, and Councilor Collins as well, so.
And our equipment is covered by our insurance policy.
Yes.
So our equipment and our long tips are covered. So which is why we've included premiums with those standing accounts.
What your question asked, and this has always been our challenge, right? Every time you come forth, it's about I'll say the financial aspect. How do we viably make the right, decision and charge the appropriate amount for the resources we have?
I always come back to that transformer that blew down there, there's a name number, it's probably almost 70 years ago now. But that was scary that night for anyone who was in the area that saw that, and you realize, you know, as I was coming home from friends in Johnstown, you guys are all racing right to the site of it. And then, you know, it really kind of puts into perspective just what is happening down there. And they're fantastic plants, they're very well run, you know, not casting any aspersions in safety down there, but it's an industrial process, things can happen, and they did that night. And when you saw it light up the sky, you had to really think that, you know, someone might not be coming home that night. And it just does sort of underline just how much you guys do to protect it. It's the whole area, because as Ray mentioned, it's a good point. A lot of Prescott people, the whole area, they work in that sector, and we want to do all we can to make sure that it's protected and everybody's safe. But at the same time, at the end of the day, there's a cost for that, and there's a fair cost for that. And just I think we're getting there, but I just think maybe a little more information and some more feedback from members of council as we think about this as well. There's a lot to digest here, Greg.
Absolutely.
Anything else tonight for feedback? If anyone comes up with any email-wise, please forward it on, and we'll get a follow-up report on this in coming weeks. And of course, we'll get feedback from Edwards Burkhardt as well. I suspect they'll have some questions on the other end about the base payment, because that's the unknown for them. And I can understand why they would have questions there as well, because of a few things happening, you know, who monitors, how it's assessed, how it's billed. I mean, is there a third party that comes in and decides that? Because as much as we say it's easy to agree the truck was here for 45 minutes, at the end of the day, they've still got to pay for that, and someone has to assess it. So I'm sure they'll have some questions on that, on call rates. So if nothing further then, thanks again. Thanks for sticking around for the extra little while. Always good to see you. And I think this is good. I don't mean to be negative about it. A few more questions we do need to have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, staff reports, 7.2 is 59-2020. That's the procedural bylaw update provided by Ms. Castle. So Kimberly, you want to take us through that? You just provided this information and feedback from everyone. So you want to take us through the highlights, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, the report before you this evening is just the next step in the process for updating the town's procedural bylaw. So as you're aware, the procedural bylaw was last fully updated in 2015. There were numerous amendments made since then, so we're just looking to consolidate all the amendments and bring it in line with best practices and also the current legislation. There's been some major changes to the municipal act since then, so we just want to bring it in line with current legislation as well. So you'll see in my report, I do speak to some of the highlights that we've included in the draft bylaw. They include an enhanced section on closed meetings in line with current legislation, linking the procedural bylaw to the code of conduct for members of council and local boards, allowing for one motion to approve bylaws to streamline meetings, and formally consolidating all amendments to the bylaw, to the procedural bylaw since 2015. I had sent out the draft bylaw, I believe, back in the spring, May or June, just for council feedback. I received some great feedback from council members, which is also highlighted in my report. Two of them that really stood out to me was adding a consent agenda section to either the committee of the whole meetings or the council agendas. I think that will help streamline meetings as well. And I also really like the idea of adding our mission statement from the town's strategic plan to front and center, the cover page of the agenda. So just so it's on our minds all the time as we begin our meetings. We also plan to also add some signage with our values and our mission statement to the council chambers wall here once we finalize the strategic plan that we were working on pre-COVID. I also wanted to discuss this evening as well and get some council feedback on meeting frequency. Since COVID-19 hit, we've been meeting twice a month. We've been having 2 special council meetings a month since we've been under a declared state of emergency. We have, Matthew and myself have received a lot of positive feedback about having 2 council meetings a month. We find that it's efficient and things get approved and ratified twice a month instead of waiting until that 4th Monday of each month. So if you'd like to continue with that, I can make the changes to the draft bylaw as well. We could eliminate the committee of the whole meetings for the 1st and 3rd Monday of each month if we go with that option, but we could still hold committee of the whole meetings as required for big ticket items like budget deliberations or big overhauls of bylaws such as the animal control bylaw that will be coming up later this fall. So we can call those special committee of the whole meetings as required, like a lot of other local municipalities do. So I was hoping to get your feedback on that tonight and any other changes you'd like to see, and I bring it back to the next meeting again for another, if we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castle. Open it up for comments, questions on the report and the proposed new bylaw and media changes. Councilor Gagnon.
So if since then, we have thought of something else, it's just not of emailing you to get.
Sure. Or through you, Mr. Mayor, you can bring it up tonight or email. I still plan on bringing this back in draft format one more time for feedback, and then hopefully getting it approved at a council meeting in October.
Councilor Schenker.
Thank you. Ms. Councilman, good job on this. I'm sorry I didn't probably participate in it as much as I should have. But I do like the idea of the consent agenda. I think that would move things along well. And meeting twice a month is a positive. The part about this evening, I'm fine with this evening on my Mike. Yeah.
6 feet apart.
Councilor.
I agree with Councilor Schenker. I do not see any need to change the seating arrangement. I think we should have our own seats, and that's all there's to it. You want to change the order, I don't care about that, but, you know, assigned seating makes sense.
The only thing we ever did, I think, one time since I've been here, we reversed it. We ended up alphabetical going the other way, but basically just mirror it. It should matter much, just gave you guys a different view of that. That's when we still have the tiny chairs. Other comments, Councilor O'Connell.
I wasn't gonna mention the seating, but other people have, I think people tune in, if they tune in regularly, would be more apt to know. Well, then they can focus on where we sit, they know who we are, playing. Chinese checkers or whatever, it might just be confusing, but that's not what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, I'm happy with all those that you did. Congratulations, it was good work. With one exception, on page, let's see, 31 of our folding here tonight, item number 41, which is halfway down the page. It says, a motion to reconsider must be made by a person who voted on the prevailing side of the motion to be reconsidered. Robert's rules, it shall be considered lost unless the majority of members present vote therefore no more than one motion to reconsider, blah, blah, blah. The pertinent part there is made by a person who voted on the prevailing side of the motion. And the reason that bothers me is 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we had a vote when I was away in the summer, whether or not to donate to the bill of the hospital. That vote was defeated. Had I been here, it wouldn't have been. And I took issue with when I came back, it was re-entered, re-voted on, and it was approved. Now, under these rules, that couldn't happen. So I'm not in favor of that particular, I don't like that.
Was it different money? Was it a significant?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we didn't treat that as a reconsideration because it came back as a different proposal, I believe.
Yeah, wasn't that the 10 years of 30K a year rather than 300?
Yeah, through you, since I've been here almost 6 years, we haven't done the formal reconsideration process at council. It doesn't happen often. If something comes back, it's because we've received new information and it's slightly different. The reconsideration is a vote on the exact same motion. I have checked with our town council, Tony Fleming and Cunningham Swan, and he says it is typical to have a motion come back, put forward by someone on the prevailing side. It just prevents abuse of the reconsideration feature, so that you don't have the losing side always bringing items back up. That would become very time consuming. It would be very efficient. And it is in line with Robert's rules, which we will be switching our bylaw to, which is standard best practice. So I would suggest that we keep it in just because it's standard best practice. But I don't foresee us using the reconsideration that often, looking into the future. There's other routes to go about it if there's new information or things have changed on a certain topic.
Okay, but going back to, going back to what I said, I quickly I forgot that the motion that I introduced was slightly different, but had I been in favor of supporting that exact same motion, it would have still been lost. I wouldn't have been able to introduce it, and I don't agree with that. I think if we voted on it, if we're all here, I guess that's a done deal, but if somebody is missing and it's a close vote, and that person wants it reintroduced for.
It's a really good question.
I think it should be.
Yeah.
So-
There must be some.
So I've also seen through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion to reconsider, because first you vote on whether or not you are going to reconsider that exact motion at a future council meeting. In some procedural bylaws I've seen, it has to be a super majority. Usually it's a regular majority for a motion to pass. A motion to reconsider, we could stick a super majority clause on that, and that might help the process.
We used to have
We
that.
removed that.
Oh, did you remove it?
Yeah.
Why?
Robert Long was not in favor of that at all.
That's another standard practice though that I've seen.
Yeah.
Is having that super majority on that type of motion.
But what does happen if, for example, like the exact scenario that Lee's talking about, he's away and something's voted and it's turned down and he wants to introduce it. There's no record of him voting on it, obviously, because he wasn't here. So could the absent member then come back and reintroduce the same motion?
To me, I'd have to look into it,
Yeah.
but if you're not here, you're absent, and if you choose not to vote on something, it's a negative,
Yeah.
right? So I can look into it and report back at the next meeting.
It's just interesting because it definitely could come up, and you could actually have a situation where someone
Yeah,
skips a meeting because they know this, and then they can just keep bringing it
Sure.
back up. If you have a large enough council, you can rotate that and bring something up eternally. So, not give anybody any ideas here, but it's an interesting, it's a really interesting point, how that would work. The other thing I just would mention, you mentioned identical. And I would say it doesn't have to be identical either, because then there's a dodge that say the motion is for $15,000 for a certain cause, it's defeated, then the person brings it back, it's $14,999. So obviously there's gotta be some, and we've never had anything like that, but I'm sure it has happened in many a municipal council meeting. So just, I don't think we need to put definitions in there because Tony would guide us in something like that, but it's just something to be prepared about if we ever get close to that. Because actually, even the hospital motion, you could challenge that because it was different. It was a different payment, but it was the same amount in the end, I believe. And anyways, it's semantics really.
I've even seen through you, Mr. Chair, councils vote all in favor to waive the rules of procedure, and they don't even go through the reconsideration process. That's another work around it too. There's always a workaround.
Yeah.
Your procedural bylaw as well. You can waive the rules like we did tonight for the delegation, but I can do a little more research and talk to my clerk colleagues in the county and come back later in September.
The last time I recall something similar was when years ago I tried to get the motion for the arena to be made the top capital works project or whatever. It was defeated. Then I brought it back. The wording was changed slightly, and I think I got it through the second time that ever happened. So that happens. I mean, it is what it is with it. But that's an excellent question, though. What an absent member and what the right that person would have who wasn't involved in the discussion. Anything further on this feedback for Councilor Burton?
Thank you. Very well written report, by the way. It's very thorough and I appreciate that. I do agree with the consent agendas. I think that's fantastic. Streamlining is important. If we're all here, why do we need to, bring everything all back up again? 2 council meetings per month was a great idea. And as needed committee of the whole meetings. That's something that we might want to consider as well. It may be a little bit earlier start if there's a big discussion, for, you know, making sure that the agendas are a little bit smaller. Because we do tend to have bigger discussions on bigger items. And I think that it was it. The seating arrangement, this doesn't bother me. I like my seat and I wouldn't want Ray sitting in my seat anyway, so.
Ray, you have a response to that?
No. Just clarification on consent agendas, you always have the option of removing a certain item from that consent agenda and dealing with it separately.
And that is the only drawback to consent agendas. We will often have items with 6-1, whatever, and so when you end up pulling stuff out, then there's a process to pull it out, then you vote separately. But most of the time, it should flow much faster.
Yeah, I think, so I envision if we move to 2 council meetings a month to have a consent agenda, that's where we'll house those regular quarterly, maybe Sean's information reports, Matthew's financial reports. If you have questions, ask them offline, or those standard information reports that may not always need a presentation or have generate a lot of questions or discussion, so that we can focus on the other larger action reports that need discussion and action taken.
Absolutely. The one thing I would suggest, there's something that comes up even at the start of the meeting, and you don't want to, you can't support item X, and talk to the clerk right at the start of the meeting, they can prepare it, so just so we're not scrambling around and printing off extra documentation if you don't need to. So just, you know, this can actually work really well. We've talked about doing this for years.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's taken so long for us to adopt it, actually.
We can simply add it if you wanted to pull something at the beginning of the meeting and add it to the regular agenda. You just do that when we're approving the agenda. That's the easiest process for that.
She'll have it printed and just fill in the blanks.
Perfect.
Before Lindsay, if we want to done. Yeah, we actually, is there a way we could actually set up a printer, like a small little, I mean, we've got stuff in here, we don't use it, you guys end up.
For you, Mr. Mayor, we don't want you using paper anymore. We went 6 months with no paper. Let's try it out. Get those iPads going.
And that's actually worked well for even the signatures, like we've been
It's
doing
great.
this consigno program where, and it's actually worked really well with that. Kimberly sometimes has to remind me 3 or 4 times to sign the damn things, but other than that, it's been actually quite seamless, and we've certainly saved a few trees. So no other feedback, if anybody comes up with anything else, of course, please email them, and we'll bring this back, and we're looking at just 2 weeks. Yep.
Sure, I can bring it back on the 21st. I'll bring back further clarity around reconsideration. And I'll also amend the draft bylaw to permit the 2 council meetings a month. Matthew and I discussed it with the first and third Monday of each month. That way, if we need to have a special committee of the whole, we could have it on the 4th. But we'll just see how that goes. So through you, we can still have the various portfolio chairs so that you're communicating with staff as well. But we think that it should be a little more efficient and get things ratified and approved on a more timely basis.
Sounds good, so we'll bring that back. I would suggest that since it's almost 20 to 8 now, we've got a fair bit here. We can plow through this relatively quickly. Just want to bring everybody's attention to the time, because we'll hit that the magic hour of 9 o'clock before we know it. It'd be nice to move through because we do have the in-camera. So we'll move along then to, this is obviously a little discussion here, 7.3 staff report 60-2020 on parking on Boundary Street. Sean, so you're up for this one?
Yeah, I'm up for this one. As everyone on council is aware, starting in early 2019, the building bylaw department began the process of evaluating the parking needs within the town. Parking working group was formed to review the parking issues and to make recommendations to council, which then last November, it was passed in council. One of the major factors that we were looking at was, for the working group, was the main arteries in town. And there was 3 that ran east and west and 3 that ran north and south. And of course, Boundary Street is one of the main north-south arteries. It came to our attention through the school bus drivers about the safety concerns regarding Boundary Street. Further consideration by the working group showed that the most concerning aspect of the entire street was really that blind spot at the far south end, just before that just as you head down. We also, studied a lot of the history relating to issues with drainage and everything else that happened to it in a very narrow street, because it is only 24 feet wide. Also, there's been increased traffic, simply, the golf course has been there for quite some time, but I mean, there is now a new school and stuff down there for St. Mark's, and of course, with the industrial park out in Johnstown, a lot of people are using that as a way to get through to the industrial park. What's funny is a lot of the items that the delegation kind of brought up were actually discussed by the working group and council. And at the time, last November, a decision was made to eliminate the parking on both sides of Boundary Street in the most high-risk area being the last block of the south end. 9 dwellings were affected by this decision. However, all the dwellings affected did have adequate parking within their own lots as per our current zoning bylaw. At a special council meeting on August 10th, the delegation spoke against the elimination of the on-street parking along Boundary Street. Staff was directed to bring back further information regarding parking along Boundary Street for the next council meeting, which is this one here. And 2 of the things that the delegation did bring up that staff thought we could take a look at it one more time was, although 40 kilometers an hour has been in Boundary Street for quite some time, with the whole town going to 40 kilometers an hour, it's more likely that traffic's going to be going closer to that speed all over town, not just, how it's like when it just drops to 40 all of a sudden and you've been driving 50 the whole time, it doesn't automatically, you just don't automatically drop down. Whereas now that the whole town's at 40, there's a better chance that the traffic speed's going to be a little bit more reasonable as vehicles pull on to and off, like coming down the street and then pulling on from King. So that could have an effect on the traffic flows in there. And one of the things that was a major concern from safety point of view that we kind of ran through was, okay, so cars coming down, as you know, southbound, there's parking on the south, on the west side. And as you're coming down, you have to go into the northbound lane basically to get around it. And so then you've got a car coming onto the street at, even though we've lowered it to 50 or 40, let's say they're doing 50, we ran the car stopping, there's a cool what you can find on Google, they got car stopping distance calculators that you got to put in, the speed and the conditions and thought things. And basically, so if a car was coming on to Boundary Street, there was a car in the north lane, basically they need about 162 feet for safe distance, for both to get stopped, both to notice, move over, whatever the case may be. So one of the things that we could do is we could simply limit the no parking from the intersection up 75 meters. It's a little bit more than the 49 meters that's required, but I like to think sometimes we're not always paying attention as close as we maybe should. So if we increase it to 75, it certainly gives us a much larger area. And then if we properly mark already in the bylaw, we're not supposed to park within 25 meters of an intersection. And if we did that, that creates also another window place where cars can pull over and stuff like that to let the cars go by both ways. And then we could also just increase some more signage. Some more signage on King Street, warning that if you're turning on the Dibble, there's some issues, warning the people at Dibble on Boundary that there's some issues, warning the north end of Boundary to yield up, oncoming traffic and stuff as that's going. And at a couple of the intersections, there is some more vegetation that can be cleaned up and stuff like that that would help with some viewing. One of the other things that could be considered is also limiting the parking on Boundary Street during school hours and stuff, saying there will be no parking during school hours, Monday to Friday sort of thing, from, I'm going to throw the number out, 8 to 4.
So 7:30 to 4:30.
But there you go, 7:30 to 4:30. So, and like I said, if we have those signs up about the yielding to oncoming traffic, I think that might slow down people too, as well in that area, even though it is one of our major south arteries. So staff has brought forward some options for you to consider and to give us some direction on. Option one is don't make any changes to the parking bylaw, which will prohibit parking on both sides. Two, permit on-street parking on boundary from Dibble to King Street, but not during school hours. So no street parking Monday to Friday, 7:30 to 4:30. Three, permit on-street parking on Boundary Street from Dibble Street south to King, but not permitted for the first 75 meters on King Street up, and then 25 meters in both directions at the intersections of both Dibble and King. Or number four, give staff other direction. There's very little financial costs in terms of overall budget. There might be some new signage, but we're going to need signage even if we had no parking there. So it's roughly the same. And I did provide the GIS map. If we came 75 meters up, basically at 299, which is the third property from the corner, it would be at the south end of that property where 75 meters would be. So,
I don't think so.
is it the third one or the fourth one?
Well, what you're suggesting would be the fourth one.
Okay. Well, it depends if you count the one on King Street as part.
It's not a King Street address, it's a Boundary Street address.
Okay. So, but that 75 meters was at the south end of the 299.
I think that's one property too many, personally. I think you could go down to the south end of 289.
Again, that just barely, it leaves you 1 meter extra. If there's any issues of someone coming south from the northbound lane and someone pulling on and they have even an extra half second of not noticing someone coming.
Okay, Sean, you're good to stop there?
I'm good to stop there, sorry.
Okay, so we'll open it up for discussion. I see Councilor Shankar was in.
So I was on the same path as Ray there, so if there's gonna be parking from 299 up to what, 377?
Correct.
So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses that would have parking.
Just from my own observation, that should be enough there, shouldn't it? I mean, usually there's only 2 or 3 vehicles on the road at any given time.
It was funny, the day after our last conversation, I just happened to be going home that way, and Bill Craig, who was, understands what we're dealing with, had 3 in his driveway and 1 in front of his house. It just happened at a particular time. But, I don't know, that seemed like a little bit longer than 75 meters to me, but maybe you're right. I haven't been playing golf this year, so that's, I'm not measuring things the way I used to. Yeah.
I did take a tape measure, it was kind of funny how the 25 and the 50 and the 75 still seem to line up pretty good with the property lines. And like I said, it's actually at the south end of 299 down, if you wouldn't park. You'd still be allowed to park in front of 299.
So what we, I think one of the neighbors might have had a misunderstanding tonight that we were voting on this, which we're not voting on this tonight, correct?
But there's no flag.
No, we're giving direction and giving them our opinion, but we're not voting to change the bylaw.
I don't know, I kind of thought we were gonna try to put it to bed tonight, by local council, whatever you want, whatever everybody thinks tonight, it's.
No, I think we should put our money where our mouth is, and we said we would look at it, and then we thought that we should have consulted the neighbors before we made the decision, so why don't we tell the neighbors which option we're leaning towards and go from there.
Councilor Burton?
Thank you. I do like the idea about the on-street parking, the no street parking during school hours. But I would limit that from 7 until 10, 2 until 5, because that includes the elementary schools and the Catholic schools, and it also includes the high schools. And sometimes if kids are getting tutored at the end of the day, there's always a late bus. So we could consider that. So if we put that in place, they can still park there during the day, but just not in those timeframes.
And would not apply to weekends, I assume.
Absolutely. And that would, that would, I think, help everybody, the neighbors and stuff. And you'll still be able to park in front of their house if they're a business owner, or have visitors or whatever during the day, but just not during those times when school buses are going by and people are going to work. It just eliminates, I think, some safety issues that we had for the parking committee, so, thank you.
Thank you. Lee, did you bring it up?
I did.
Councilor O'Connell and back to Councilor Shanker.
I took a drive down there today, which is what I usually do when we're discussing something. When you're trying to exit onto Boundary from Dibble, I don't know if we can do anything about it, but there's a big bush, the house is right on the corner. And there's a big bush there now. I was driving a Volkswagen, so I couldn't see over the bush, and a lot of people are driving smaller cars these days. So for me to actually see what was coming in north, it was actually pretty easy because there was nobody parked on that side of the street at all. But I just imagined if there was a car there and my front end was halfway across the street before I was able to see what was coming south. So I don't know if we can do anything about it. I don't know if the bush has to be trimmed or removed. That's part of the problem right there. I'm not in favor of the school day parking. To me, that just gets complicated. What I am in favor of is no parking on the south end, no parking on the north end. But like Ray mentioned, 299, I actually drove around the block twice because I couldn't believe it the first time when I saw 299. It's halfway up the block. That's too far up. And I know you're going for a foot, meter, whatever distance here, but it's too far up the block, in my opinion. So I'm in favor of backing that down to the 50 meter, whatever the normal is. Definitely 25 meters from the corner, wherever that takes us. And I'm hoping to take it south of the two driveways that are the closest to south of Dibble Street. But the bush has to go or be severely pruned and to me adjust those two north and south. And I think that's amazing. Thank you.
I just wanted to double check something. Our winter rules, you can't park on this road at all. right?
You can, just not between the times of midnight and 7 a.m.
Okay. So if we were to put the school in there as well, it'd be 11 at night till 5.
No, schools would be 7:30 in the morning until 4:30. Well, that's what's in there, but Leanne suggested something a little different, but it would be definitely during the daytime when school is in and only Monday to Friday.
Do we have issues with Boundary Street for the plowing of snow? Like your cars parked there overnight?
Occasionally, and then we take it in or tow as needed, just like we do anywhere else in town.
Okay, who hasn't weighed in here yet? Teresa and Mike, so we'll start with Councilor Johnson.
I pretty much agree with everything what Councilor McConnell says. When the delegation happened recently, the comments around the table were very supportive and understood their concerns. So I need to think that we have to address that. But I think 75 meters is too far too, and 50 is plenty. And and I'm afraid, because Roy will get mad at me again, to say that I wasn't in agreement to begin with, so, but I would support number 3 if it changed from 75 to 50. with yearly, cutting of the bush.
Well, that's something we need to really track, because it's not just that intersection, there are a pile of them in town now that are overgrown. And I know we do have pile patrols on weekends and wherever, if someone could actually, like T-Swanee this past weekend again, someone just make note, and we've got to get on this, because there's at least 7 or 8 that have grown up really badly in the last few years. That's just one of them. There are quite a few of them.
Just
We need to
coming
get
here,
trained.
once in front of the Marlettes, it's
Yeah,
awful,
yeah, it's,
trying to cross every,
yeah, there are some pretty high, some pretty high volume traffic intersections as well. It's not just small intersections in town. Councilor Ostrander.
Thank you. Well, I originally, and still am in favor of the number 3 with the adjustment, I guess, to the 50 meters. I didn't think 75 meters was that far. But if you got a school bus and 2 or 3 cars waiting to get onto King Street, 50 meters would get filled up, I think, pretty quick. The 25 meters from the intersections of Devil and James is a good idea. There's a lot of sightline issues with those 2 streets, and particularly when you're coming south. I noticed it today, I noticed it 100 times before. But as you're coming just south of James, you're starting to do this in the windshield of your car because you can't quite see the drop off just before Devil. So, yeah, you need a little wiggle room there, particularly if there's somebody eyeballing left of them. So I'm okay with the number 3 option, I guess, with the 50 meter from 75. I'm sure Craig would appreciate the assistance. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, I'll leave it to Councilor McConnell for the last word here. I just want a quick comment myself, and then we'll try to hash together a motion based on the consensus, what I think I'm hearing. Councilor McConnell.
Something that we didn't take into consideration, which I meant to mention earlier, and I apologize, I forgot it, but now that all of our schools are kind of in the northeast quadrant, like both elementary schools are up there, we used to have Central north of my place. We had St. Mark's down on Edward. We have all the kids being transported from all over town to schools by school buses. So it's not just school buses going up Boundary Street. School buses go by my place in James every day. They go up and down the West Street. And most all of the streets in town, unless it's something that has been recently rebuilt like St. Lawrence Street, you can't meet another car coming if a car is parked on either side of the street. They're just not that wide, so people have to stop and let cars go by. And that's no different than Boundary Street. And unless you want to build all the streets in town, which is impossible because of the closeness of the house and the street like we have done with St. Lawrence Street, it's just a 5-foot light in town. The streets aren't built to today's widths. And vehicles are a heck of a lot bigger than they used to be. And I think we just have to accept that and live with it.
To a certain extent, there are some areas where we're gonna land. Dibble's coming up as well too. I mean, there's the other lane which is coming to not be well. No one has noticed it yet or not, but that's a tricky one as well. That's even worse because that is so narrow there. You can't, when you get a couple good sized trucks on the side, you can't get a vehicle through there, period. I've had times where I've had to actually turn around and drive back the other way when there's work going on that one house there. But anyway, so what I'm hearing is, I think pretty much everyone's mentioned support for 3. Sorry to Councilor Burton, but I think that you were the only one that did bring that one up, so we try to narrow this down. I actually, like, when I initially looked at this myself, I thought the school zone idea would be potentially a good one, but I just don't think it'd be, and no blame to the neighbors, I just don't think we'd enforce it enough. It would be a tricky one to get in there and enforce, but if we actually set the regulation up, so I'm hearing a lot of support for 3, if everyone's okay with that. But the only comment, of course, was the idea that 75 was too far. Talking about cutting it to 50. I mean, would it even, but I know that a couple have mentioned that 75 isn't, going to 50 is maybe not enough. Sean, you mentioned that. Could we cut the difference and say 60 or something like that?
We could
Or-
certainly pick any number in between.
Yeah.
I was just sticking at 25 because it was relatively easy to keep figuring out. Like I said, 50 seemed really tight because it takes you 49 meters if you to stop, if you're coming the other way and you don't realize someone's in the northbound, like in the northbound lane heading south. That gives you a whole meter and a half unless they're really on top of
Well,
things.
that's what I say, could we maybe just stretch that just a little bit more down to 50? Is everyone okay with something like that, kind of break this off in the middle?
I think you're gonna have to look to see where 50 comes exactly, where 60 comes, because you may be popping it right in the middle of somebody's house or another driveway,
Yeah, so-
and if you don't have room to park because of that 50, between the 50 and your driveway.
Yeah, can we-
it's all not, you know.
Yeah. No, I was gonna suggest, we don't have to.
50 meters takes you to the middle of the second house.
Okay, so there's gotta be a way, I mean, we don't have to be exactly dead on the 60. We can just say approximately 60, is that okay? Or is it, do you guys wanna stick with the 50? I honestly, I don't care, I just wanna get this resolved, and make sure that the neighbors are looked after, and I'll just, my whole thing with this all along was I thought we should try moving it back a little bit first, so I'm actually happy we've gotten to this point to move them back. I do think Dibbles may be the next discussion though. So what's everybody think about approximately 60, and we'll let staff work it out so they're not cutting off parking spaces?
Take a look at the southern boundary of property 289.
Okay, so anyone want to make that motion? We can put this in bed, Councilor McConnell. So we'll say just the wording just changed to approximately, so move that permit on-street parking on Boundary Street from Dibble Street south to King Street, but not permit on-street parking approximately 60 meters from King Street and 25 meters from the intersections of Dibble and James. Ray, are you good with that as the wording? Okay, seconder, Councilor Ostrander, if you're good. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, so we do have, under 7, 4, and 5, we have updates from Sean as well. So we'll start off with 61, 2020 bylaw enforcement activity for the first half of the year. Mr. Mayor, if you could just zip through this as quickly as humanly possible tonight, just hit the real highlights, and then we'll move right into 7.5, 62, 2020 construction.
It's gonna have to be the highlights because my computer's died, so going from memory basically. Basically, everything's been good. This is the first half of the year through the thing. We've been extremely busy because of COVID, all the things that went along with that. We've been providing service to the town at 7 days a week, at least a few hours each day. We've had to rotate our normal hours so that we have someone in on the weekends and stuff like that. And as things have changed, so has bylaw enforcement. Because each phase or each stage has its own things that you have to pretty much pay attention to. One of the things that unfortunately will not happen this year is we were informed the other day that the rabies clinic will be a no-go. So therefore, during the month of September, we are hoping to get out and doing some, going around door to door, because we normally get quite a few dog tags at the rabies clinic. And it's been a good year. I mean, some things have slowed down, but most other things are up there. At some point, I suspect we will have some better signages in different areas, including near boat ramps, municipal parking lots, parks. Just reminding people that there's no smoking in any of our parks. That there's, dogs should be on a leash. And there's no camping overnight, no matter how many apps say there is. So we got it taken off that one app, and hopefully it's not on any others. And that's it for bylaw.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions from council? The only thing I would add is the smoking. That's been the constant issue because the beach has been so heavily used this year. And most people have been really good about it, and the attendance down there have been very good for the most part in reminding people. And a lot of people honestly don't seem to be aware of it, because I've mentioned it to a couple as well, and they're just not aware that it's not in the, they thought it was just actual play structures and so forth, not in the park itself. So what we really need down there is a really big, like a greeting sign right by that wall, or hopefully at some point we get that wall right there and turn that into a parking zone, because that's 9 spots we get out there. But some sort of signage there to welcome people and remind them of smoking in particular, because that's been a major concern, the main thing that people follow.
And it's not in this report, but the splash pad has been a big success. Other than we constantly have to remind people that dogs are not to play in it, they're not to ride their bikes through it. And skateboarding is not the best thing to do around there either, so.
Yeah, I want to thank staff too for the prompt attention to something down there. Did receive a note from a resident, some of the concrete had just gotten a little bit sharp on some of the sides, and staff responded immediately and ground some things down, and just ask anyone if anything does come up, just let us know first. Generally good idea to talk to us first, try to let us fix it rather than go straight to everybody's deity these days, Facebook. But I just want to thank staff for doing that, because the response was very quick on that. So move along to the next report, please, Sean, on 7.5, report 62-2020 on construction activity for the first half of the year.
First half of the year has been excellent. I can tell you it has continued. I can also tell you, although it's not in this report, that we just hit our 100th permit yesterday, which basically gets the full year in with about 3 months still to go. We had great success this year working with our neighbors, finding software solutions that would work for all of us. That took some of our time this year as well. And it's just been a good year. Anyone that's been down and seen the apartment building, it's at the structural steel level now. It'll continue along. And we've had 2 or 3 or 4 what I consider relatively large projects. Yes, last year we got none, this year we got 4, so it kind of averages out to a year, which is where we normally are, so.
It's, yeah, great news on that, the one big building, of course, there's a tide of us all boats, so it's nice to see that's moving along so quickly. Any comments, questions for Sean on the construction report? Seeing none, thanks again, Sean, for that. So moving on, 7.6. We do have staff report 63-2020. That's a CAO update that Matthew did provide a little earlier this afternoon. Mr. CAO, please take us through your report.
Sure, thank you very much. So in terms of sidewalk cloud, our request for proposal that closed last Friday, we received 3 bids, and we will be evaluating those and bringing it back to council. Fort Town Night Run did have a follow-up letter to provide information around why they would want to use the south parking spaces for the run on, I believe, the 26th, and that's in the report. They have reached out to the majority of businesses on the south side who have signed that they would be fine with that, and so we want to bring that to council's attention. And finally, the east side, or the east sidewalk on Edward Street from King to Water, was referred to previously this evening. That sidewalk currently is not accessible. You cannot get a wheelchair up and down that sidewalk with how the trees are currently on there. So we took a look at some options. Also, those trees, this particular picture is from 2013, and those trees have grown substantially since then, and the roots are actually pushing up the interlock. So, and interlock isn't, it doesn't allow water to run through it, so it's not an option from that perspective. What we could do is remove the trees and either concrete the entire area or concrete a 1.5 meter width of sidewalk. To do the 1.5 meter width is approximately 15,000. To concrete the entire thing from side to side is just shy of 20,000 plus HSD. So our kind of concept is, what is the purpose of the sidewalk? And the purpose of the sidewalk is to be able for pedestrians to traverse it, and therefore it not being accessible in this particular case seems to go against the requirement of what the sidewalk is there for. We would recommend, from staff perspective, to remove the 3 trees, replace them with 3 trees perhaps in a different area that allows for traversing, and putting that 1.5 meter width sidewalk for the length of that area at a cost of approximately $14,800 plus HST. The fiscal policy reserve could work to support that cost. Thank you.
So if we could divide this up for discussion, as I'm assuming not too many people are going to make comments on the sidewalk, 2 items here that we have some feedback. So let's start with the sidewalk. Maybe that's the easier one to do. The other one's a little more longer, a little more complicated. Councilor Young, are you going to comment on the sidewalk?
Why wouldn't we take up these paving stones and put them back down after we remove the trees?
We could do that as well. There will continue to be some root growth or decay underneath, which may have some effect, but certainly we can.
Well, it depends what we do with the tree. I mean, you can't, the trees are worth saving.
No, so they've grown to a size now that you wouldn't be able to move them.
Well, there is equipment that can move them. It's expensive, but there is equipment that can come in and pick up a very large tree.
So
relocate it, if the tree's healthy.
true. So the tree that we moved at the splash pad last year is about the maximum size you can move. And that was a cost of $2,000 to move that tree, a fairly small amount. I believe those trees are now in excess of that size.
If they're worse, if there's a worse saving, I think we should try and save them. I would just put down the paving stone, put down the pavers again, as opposed to, it's cheaper than $15,000 for sure.
It's going to require a fair amount of excavation work because of how those roots have kind of moved out in that sidewalk area.
But we have the equipment personally, I mean, the town has equipment to do that.
Okay, further comments, questions on this section? Councilor McConnell, you mentioned you're not. Did you want to comment on this and maybe wait in a little bit further?
Thank you very much, Mayor. My idea would cost virtually nothing and it would maintain the trees. It's essentially to take that block of sidewalk out of our inventory of sidewalks. We have a sidewalk on the other side of the street. This sidewalk has got the trees planted, well, they're not in the middle of the sidewalk, but close to it. I think trees are worth preserving. We have a person here who gave us a presentation on adding more trees, and we're going to take 3 out for what I see is no good reason. If there was no sidewalk at all on that block, I could see the problem, but there is a sidewalk on the other side of the street. And leave the trees there, remove some of the blocks around them that are heaved, call that a boulevard or a, call it whatever you want, but you don't need a sidewalk on both sides of that street. Block it on the north side, and the south end with a planter or something, and leave it alone. It's not gonna cost us anything to do that, or virtually nothing, and we maintain the trees. Move on to something else. Thank you very much.
Further comments on tree gate? Councilor Burton?
Thank you. I was going towards what Ray was suggesting, but I really like the idea of what Lee is suggesting. We could put a nice planter that we have behind the Market Square and really jazz that area. I think that's a fabulous idea.
Further discussion? Councilor Shanker?
I know that we've taken a lot of grief from our residents when we changed the lights on King Street. And one of the big things that feedback we got was you can only cross on one side of the street. People complain about that every day almost. And I say, just walk to the other side and cross. But, they just they like their routine of doing things. If all of a sudden you make this street or this sidewalk inaccessible, even though it would look lovely the way you're presenting it, I don't know how that would go over, especially when you have the Sunday night forum there and Sunday night sing-along. Concerts, thank you. And Shakespeare, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of traffic on there. Accessibility wise, I see what Matt's saying, it's $15,000 so, but I don't know. I think we need to look at that just a little bit more. From the picture, I don't see a lot of root trouble, but.
So that picture was from 2013.
It's really bad, yeah, it's huge.
Today's picture is much bigger.
We've got it blocked off now for a reason, it's not, we've had, the public works barriers have been there, the last couple of weeks, I think, anyways, because it's not safe.
It's very friction.
Yeah, it's a real trip hazard, that whole section, it's gotten really bad the last 2 years.
Gotcha. Guess I need to look at that a little closer.
There's a lot for you to do.
Just weigh in on that one, I don't like getting rid of trees, because I, like trees, and the other reason, we do get criticism whenever we do, get rid of them for good, even though we have adopted a policy where we have to remove one, we'll plant one or two somewhere else, so it's not like we're deforesting the town or anything like that. But this has always been an issue for me because it's not a welcoming looking spot either. I've always had a bit of an issue. It's dark, it's narrow, now it's heaved, and it just looks rather dilapidated. The trees never should have been put there in the first place because they made that whole section inaccessible. Now they've caused the damage. So, quite frankly, I think one of the things we've always talked about is this new welcoming aspect where we want people to walk from King Street to Water and vice versa. And if we're gonna close off a sidewalk that could be turned into a nice open space with those beautiful, they're so striking all the time. But most people don't even see them. I point them out to people all the time, and they're looking at it for the first time, is that stretch at the back of the clock tower parking lot. Those are gorgeous and planted. So, and I think if we put, 4 or 5 of those there, and just like if we relay the paving stone to cut the cost and see what we can do with that, as Ray suggested, we've got a beautiful accessible walkway for people down there. Corey's right. A lot of people park up here in the Lee building for the concerts and for Shakespeare. So that sidewalk is used pretty extensively in the summertime. You see a stream of people that come down there that park in that area, going down to the Sunday night concerts and go in the back exit. So I honestly, I really wouldn't be in favor of taking that out, taking pedestrians out of the mix on that. But if we could save the trees and relocate them, if there's a way to do that, because they do look reasonably healthy. But at the same time, they just don't work in that site. We're gonna take criticism. I think we're gonna have to take some trees out of the downtown overall, and we're gonna take some criticism for that. But the reality is, the trees don't work where they are. They're heaving the pavement. They're not healthy in those spots. They are 40 years old plus 2 now, some of them. So, but I actually like the staff plan here to remove this and just clean this whole area and add in those urns, because those urns are just beautiful. The more we can add urns like that and go downtown on King Street, I think we really bring up the look of the downtown. So I pretty much in favor of the staff plan here, but I would try what Councilor Young mentioned to save the paving stone and cut back some of the expense. And save the trees if we can. I think we need to make an effort to try to move them if at all possible. So what's everybody think? Do you want to bring this one back, or I'm assuming staff would like some input on this fairly soon as we get the work done before the end of the year. That's correct, Lisa?
I just haven't had time to walk by it or whatever. I just kind of think I want to save the trees too, but you can't, but then just to put cement pieces over top, that would kind of be ugly, right? And I know the cost to do it. To take all the interlocking stones out is even more, which is not any prettier. And then those planters are a nice idea, but that one won't, the space won't allow for them either, because then it won't be accessible either for a different reason.
No, I think they will. Isn't that the plan? If they're moved out a little bit, there is room, because the trees are actually planted. We mentioned that they're almost in the middle of the pathway, we move them out further.
Yeah, we would use slightly smaller ones than the ones that are on the water, but we can move them out further to the road, and therefore I would provide that extra space.
And is the sidewalk beside O'Keefe's, is it accessible?
Uh,
It's very narrow, very narrow.
But we are creating the ramp off of it at the back as part of this year's work.
Narrow and slope.
Yeah.
And highly populated with people that just.
That's true too, because the workers, they take their smoke breaks out there, and people do hang out in that sidewalk quite a bit, so it's. So everyone want to bring this back then in a couple of weeks, get a little more information on staff with some of the options and feedback we suggested tonight, so we're all good for that. And we get a little more information from Phil or something on what the look of the urns would be and what could happen with the
Can I
trees.
just,
All right?
can I just clarify one thing? Matthew, to replace in 1.5 meters, how wide is it?
So I believe that it's a total of 3 meters.
So half would be brick and half would be concrete?
Correct.
Yeah, and I know that all these little expenses add up, but one thing that we have heard over and over again is about the beauty of the downtown streetscaping and so on. And even little projects like this can have an impact long term. So if we had to put an extra couple bucks into it, we make it pretty. I don't see anything wrong with that, because we are a lot of tourists who go down that for Shakespeare and for the concerts. So anything we can do to hopefully bring people back, break their ankle, they're not gonna come back. So, yeah, it is a busy section for pedestrians. Okay, so we'll bring that one back in a couple weeks, everyone good for that. And Matthew, you've got some feedback there. And so the other one just is in the Fort Town Lake Run, a lot of comments from Michael Rhodes. I don't know if anyone wants to touch on that, but he's obviously looking for some sort of response here, so. Mr. Armstrong, any, you did meet with him, did you not, earlier today?
Certainly, we walked through the various aspects of the event. Still, things are on track. I wanted to really address the issues around being able to close the set aside parking on King Street, and it would run from St. Lawrence all the way to Edward. Certainly, he's done his homework, identified things in here as to why running on pavement versus concrete is easier, that sort of thing. But that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Did I read in there that he had letters of support from the businesses on the south side?
So there's, I believe, 5 or 6 of the larger ones that will be open on Saturday have signed a petition to say that they're okay.
They're okay with it? I think if I was there, I wouldn't.
Just to build on that, if he's getting support from the stores, it'd be awful not to support it. And on a trial basis, 1 year, see how much back we get. It's a great event. It's a great event, and it does bring a lot of people in, and puts Prescott on the map, in that culture. One I can't relate to.
It'll be a busy day, pretty sure.
Yeah.
We got any feedback from the OPP?
The OPP didn't have any issues from that perspective. Yeah, you're fine with it.
So when it happens next year, could we keep a detailed expense that we're faced with?
Mhm.
Of setting up
Absolutely.
the cones and whatever else we wind up doing?
Absolutely. This particular is a little bit unique in that it being closed all day. Usually this would be an evening type of event, and so you wouldn't notice it that much. But certainly this is, we've got it set up this year, and it requires a longer closing.
Any other feedback? I know there are businesses that sign this, but I know every time we've ever tried to close one of those streets down there for anything, it turns into a civil war, because half of them don't want it. There are a number of businesses that really, give an example, because I know I don't think you mind, is Tim Nexon with the Fish and Chip Boys. He gets a lot of weekend traffic that just, stop at the blue, and it's, it's not the end of the world, no parking on the one side, but just getting a petition from a small number of businesses, it's still a difficult thing for me to, but if you want to try it, I'm not gonna stand in the way. Councilor McConnell?
Has the BMA given us any input?
No, this came in late, this letter just came in, it was last week, it came in after the last BIA meeting, it was never raised before. I don't know if Mike just was really concerned about the reaction that we gave him, because you said and I said as well that night, that would be difficult to close it for that length of time. And I think it's just something that kind of percolated with them, and they came back with this few, pretty sure this just came in, it was last week. Wasn't it? We all got it, didn't we?
I'm not
You
sure.
said it that way? I thought everyone did, maybe I'm wrong, I did, I just looked quick at the sidewalks.
This came up in a May meeting too, didn't it?
What was the,
Parking on one side.
Yeah, he brought it up here with us 2 months ago, when was it? Yeah, it was August or July, meeting that Mike brought it up with us.
So in terms of closing the south side, and he did mention it in the BIA, they didn't have any opinion from what I remember, one way or the other.
Yeah, but it wasn't a major point of that meeting either, that he was making this request. See, this and the petition just sort of showed up. So the BIA hasn't endorsed it in the street closure. So anyways, it's whatever everyone thinks here. If the OPP doesn't have an issue with it though, you've got some businesses, I'm always wary about it though, because with our law, we have the EDR deactivated, and where I know he's got protocols for that. It's one thing to have protocols, it's another thing to deal with the reality. So, anyone want to entertain a motion then to allow this, because I think we should track this. Councilor Burton, so just a motion to allow the closure of the south side, so you got, do you have the wording there?
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor, that council approved that the parking space area along the south side of King Street be closed from St. Lawrence Street to Edward Street for the 2024 night run.
Or town night.
Or town, I can never say it.
Okay, so moved by Councilor Burton, seconded by Councilor Jansen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh, Councilor Burton.
question? How are they accessing King Street? Where, they're starting at the fort, right? And how do they get to King Street? They only want the street closed from Edward to George. So they're running on King Street east of Edward from Van Toggen without those parking spaces being closed from, some parking spaces from east to Edward Street. Because there is parking along there as well.
I believe they're running in the park at that point.
Okay. Question answered, thank you.
All in favor? Motion carried. Is there anything else in those requests, Matthew, that you need any direction on? Oh, good, thank you. Okay, move on to, actually, let's take a recess now. We're almost 2.5 hours here. We'll take our break now and come back in 5-10 minutes.